They say some moments haunt you forever. Some mistakes cling to you like shadows. You can't outrun them, can't erase them, no matter how hard you try. It's been 2 years since that night. 2 years since everything changed. And yet, every night, like clockwork, I wake up at 3 a.m., drenched in sweat, my heart racing, wondering if it was all just a dream or a nightmare. But I know the truth. It happened. And no matter how much I try to bury it, push it to the deepest, darkest corners of my mind, it always finds its way back. You ever have a moment like that? A moment so small, so insignificant at first, that you don't even realize it's the beginning of the end? A look, a touch, a feeling you shouldn't have. That's how it started for me. So simple, so innocent. Until suddenly, it wasn't. Until suddenly, I was standing at the edge of something I swore I'd never cross. And before I even knew what was happening, before I even had the chance to stop myself, I was already falling. And once you fall, there's no going back, is there? It's funny how life plays tricks on you. How it makes you believe you're in control, right up until the moment you lose it all. I had a husband, a home, a life I thought was stable, predictable, safe. But safe is just another word for empty, isn't it? Because what happens when you wake up one day and realize that the person sleeping next to you doesn't see you anymore? When the love you once shared has turned into nothing but routine, conversations that feel like scripts, touch that feels like obligation. What happens when loneliness doesn't just knock at your door, but moves in, sits at your dinner table, sleeps in your bed? That's where I was, drowning in silence, fading into the background of my own life. And then, he walked in. My 21-year-old nephew. He wasn't supposed to matter, wasn't supposed to be anything more than family. Just a kid I'd watched grow up. But something changed. I wish I could tell you the exact moment it happened. That there was some clear turning point when my world shifted. But the truth is, it crept up on me. Like a slow-burning fire, building heat before you even realize you're standing too close to the flames. One moment, I was just his aunt. The next, I was something else entirely. I still ask myself, how? How did I let this happen? But the answer is always the same, because I was lonely. Because I was starved for attention. Because the way he looked at me made me feel something I hadn't felt in years. Wanted. Seen. Alive. And the worst part? I didn't want to stop it. I should have. But I didn't. And one night, when he walked into my room, I knew there was no turning back. This is my story. My confession. And by the end of it, you might hate me. You might judge me. Or maybe, you'll understand me. Either way, I need to tell it. Because keeping it inside is eating me alive. And if you've ever faced a moment of weakness that changed your life forever, I want you to share your thoughts in the comments. Let's talk about the things no one wants to admit. And if you want more real-life confessions, stories of passion, betrayal, and the choices that break us, subscribe to Shocking Infidelity Saga. Because trust me, this is just the beginning. I never thought my life would turn out like this. Married for over a decade, a home built with years of commitment, a life that, on the surface, looked stable, secure, perfect. But perfection is just a well-rehearsed lie, isn't it? Beneath the well-kept house, the carefully curated smiles and family photos, the neatly arranged dinner plates on the table, there was a void. A silence so deep it echoed. My husband was a good man once. At least, I think he was. I try to remember a time when I felt his love like something tangible, when his touch sent warmth through me instead of a cold reminder of obligation. But those memories feel distant. Faint. Like trying to recall a dream you had years ago. Somewhere along the way, we lost each other. Or maybe, I lost him. At first, it was small things. Nights spent in separate corners of the house. His hand no longer reaching for mine when we walked side by side. The way he stopped noticing when I wore a new dress or changed my hair. Then, it was everything. Conversations became transactional. Did you pay the bills? What time is the plumber coming? Did you pick up the groceries? And then, even those exchanges became rare. It was like living with a ghost. A man who existed in my space, but never with me. I should have fought for us. I should have tried harder. But after years of trying, of bending and breaking and piecing myself back together, only to be met with indifference, I stopped. I stopped waiting for him to see me. Stopped hoping he would choose me. Stopped believing that love, real, soul-consuming love, still had a place in my life. And then, he arrived. My nephew. 21 years old. Fresh-faced, full of life. The son of my husband's sister. He moved in with us temporarily, or so we thought. A few months at most, until he figured things out, got on his feet. I barely noticed at first. Just another presence in the house. Another body moving through the hallways. But then I did notice. It started subtly. The way he carried himself, so confident, so present. The way he laughed so easily, like the world hadn't yet weighed him down. The way he saw me. I don't mean in the way family sees you, out of obligation or habit. I mean truly saw me. When he spoke to me, he looked into my eyes, not past me. When I entered a room, his gaze followed, not out of duty, but curiosity. When I laughed, he listened, as if my joy mattered. And that was dangerous. Because I had spent so long feeling like I didn't matter. It was at a family gathering when I first really felt it. A summer evening, the backyard filled with the sounds of laughter and clinking glasses. My husband was off to the side, lost in conversation with his colleagues, detached as always. I stood by the grill, absently swirling a drink in my hand, watching the way the setting sun cast a golden glow over everything. And then, his voice. Soft, close. You seem far away. I turned, surprised to find him standing there, a boy who had grown into a man seemingly overnight. I smiled, a practiced, polite smile. The kind you wear when you've spent years hiding what you really feel. Just thinking. His eyes lingered, studying me in a way that made my skin warm. You do that a lot. I laughed, a dry, humorless chuckle. Guess I have a lot to think about. And then, something shifted. He tilted his head, watching me with an expression I couldn't quite place. Like he was trying to solve a puzzle. You're different when he's not around. I felt my breath catch, my grip tightening on my glass. Who? He didn't need to say it. We both knew. My husband. The man who had long stopped noticing the parts of me that still craved attention. I should have walked away. Should have brushed it off with a laugh, a dismissive comment. But I didn't. Because for the first time in years, someone had noticed. And it felt good. Too good. From that moment, everything felt different. I became aware of him in ways I shouldn't have. The way he moved around the house, so effortlessly, so comfortably. The way his voice carried, deep yet smooth, holding a confidence that made me listen. The way he looked at me, not with the detached familiarity of family, but with something else. Something I wasn't ready to name. And worst of all, the way I started looking at him. It was wrong. I knew that. But knowing something is wrong doesn't stop the heart from feeling. And as the days passed, the tension grew. It was in the moments of silence that stretched too long. The accidental touches that lingered a second more than they should have. The stolen glances that spoke volumes. A slow, unraveling thread, pulling us closer, tighter, until eventually, there would be nothing left but the inevitable. But I wasn't there yet. Not yet. For now, I was still pretending. Pretending that I had control. Pretending that this was nothing. Pretending that I wasn't about to make the biggest mistake of my life. But deep down, I already knew the truth. I was standing on the edge of something irreversible. And I was about to fall. It happened on a hot summer afternoon. The kind of heat that makes the air thick, heavy, makes everything feel slower, like the world itself is drowning in something unseen. We had all gone to the beach. It was supposed to be a simple family outing, just another day, like so many before it. But nothing about that day would be simple. Nothing about it would be forgettable. The sand was scorching under my feet, the sun high and relentless. Laughter echoed around me, kids playing by the shore, families gathered under umbrellas, waves crashing in rhythmic, lazy rolls. I sat under the shade, watching my husband in the distance, half buried in his phone, his body present, but his mind elsewhere, always elsewhere. And then, him. My nephew. He had been in the water, his skin glistening, droplets sliding down the sharp lines of his jaw, over the muscles that hadn't been there years ago. I shouldn't have noticed. But I did. He ran a hand through his damp hair, shaking off the excess water, then walked toward me, his eyes squinting slightly against the sun. "You're not going in?" I smiled, shaking my head. "I think I'll just watch today." He grabbed a towel, rubbing the water from his face, then tossed it over his shoulder. "You should at least get some sun." Before I could reply, he reached for the bottle of sunscreen on the table. "Turn around. I'll help." I should have said no. I should have told him I could do it myself. But I didn't. I turned my back to him, pulling my hair over one shoulder, exposing my bare skin to the heat, to the moment that was about to change everything. I heard the click of the bottle, the sound of lotion being squeezed into his palm. And then, his hands. The first touch sent a shiver down my spine, though the air was thick with warmth. At first, it was nothing. Just the gentle, familiar glide of fingers smoothing over my shoulders, down my arms. But then, it wasn't. The pressure lingered a second too long. The slow, deliberate movements became something else entirely. His fingers brushed along my spine, pausing at the small of my back. A moment stretched too thin. And then, silence. I could feel his breath warm, steady, just behind me. I didn't move. I didn't speak. Because something inside me had already shifted. I wasn't thinking about the sunscreen anymore. I wasn't thinking about my husband, sitting just a few feet away. I wasn't thinking about anything except the fact that I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Seen. Noticed. Alive. That night, I couldn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, the darkness of the room pressing in on me, wrapping around me like a secret I hadn't yet spoken out loud. I could still feel it. The heat of his hands on my skin. The moment of hesitation that felt heavier than it should have. I told myself it was nothing. A touch was just a touch. A moment was just a moment. So why couldn't I stop thinking about it? I heard the soft knock on my bedroom door just as I was about to close my eyes. Not loud. Just enough for me to know that someone was there. My breath caught. My heart pounded. I sat up, glancing at the other side of the bed where my husband lay, his back to me, lost in a sleep that had long been separate from mine. Another knock. This time softer. I slipped out of bed, my feet barely making a sound against the wooden floor. When I opened the door, he was standing there. His eyes met mine, something unreadable passing between us in the dim glow of the hallway light. He hesitated. And then he leaned in, just enough for me to feel his breath against my cheek. A moment. A pause. Then, so quietly I almost didn't hear it goodnight. And then he was gone. I stood there, the space between us heavy with something I couldn't name. A goodnight had never felt so dangerous. So electric. So wrong. I closed the door, leaned against it, exhaling a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. This was just the beginning. And I knew it. I told myself it was nothing. A knock on the door. A whispered goodnight. A moment that passed as quickly as it came. Nothing. But nothing doesn't keep you awake at night. Nothing doesn't make your heart pound when you hear footsteps in the hallway. Nothing doesn't make your skin burn with the memory of hands that barely touched you. So why did I feel like I had already done something wrong? The next morning, I told myself I was imagining it. That the tension in the air was just my own guilt pressing against my ribs. That the way he looked at me across the breakfast table was the same way he had always looked at me, warm, familiar, harmless. But then, his fingers brushed mine when he passed me a mug of coffee. Just a second too long. Just enough to make me pause, to make my breath hitch. I glanced at him, and there it was, that look. Not just polite. Not just friendly. Something else. Something I wasn't ready to name. I started noticing small things. Or maybe I had always noticed them, but I had never let myself feel them before. The way his eyes found me in a crowded room. The way he leaned in when we spoke, like every word that left my lips mattered. The way he listened, not out of habit, not out of obligation, but because he genuinely wanted to. It had been years since someone looked at me like that. Years since I felt like my presence meant something. My husband used to look at me that way once, a long time ago. Now, I could stand right in front of him, say his name, touch his hand, and he wouldn't even see me. But my nephew? He saw me. And that terrified me more than anything. I started avoiding him. Not obviously, not in a way that anyone else would notice. But I stopped lingering in the kitchen when I knew he was there. Stopped making casual conversation when we were alone. Stopped looking at him for too long, because every time I did, I felt like I was standing at the edge of something I couldn't take back. But it didn't matter. Because no matter how much space I put between us, the pull was still there. Nights were the worst. I would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, my body tense, my mind restless. I would replay moments that should have been meaningless. His voice, his touch, the way he had whispered goodnight like it meant something more. I told myself I was reading too much into it. That it was harmless. That I was just lonely, and he was just kind. But late at night, in the quiet of my own thoughts, I wasn't so sure. Because the truth was, I liked it. I liked the attention. The way it made me feel. Alive. Wanted. Like a woman again, not just a wife, not just someone's afterthought. And that was the real problem, wasn't it? Not him. Me. Because if I wasn't careful, I was going to do something I could never take back. I knew I should have stopped it. I should have drawn the line. Taken whatever it was that was growing between us and smothered it before it could take shape, before it could become something real. But I didn't. Or maybe, deep down, I didn't want to. Because every time I told myself to walk away, something pulled me back. Something I couldn't explain. Something I didn't want to name. Something that felt more alive than anything I had felt in years. The first time it happened, it was late. I had gone downstairs for a glass of water, my mind restless, my body tense with thoughts I wasn't ready to admit to myself. I didn't expect to find him there. Standing in the dim glow of the kitchen light, shirtless, leaning against the counter like he belonged there, like he was waiting for something. Or someone. I should have turned around. Instead, I stood frozen in the doorway, my fingers gripping the edge of the frame, my heart pounding so loudly I swore he could hear it. His eyes met mine. Neither of us spoke. But the air between us was thick, charged with something we had both been pretending wasn't there. He lifted a glass, took a slow sip of water. Then, "You can't sleep either?" His voice was quiet, smooth, as if we weren't standing in the middle of something that felt like a mistake waiting to happen. I swallowed hard, stepping forward as if pulled by an invisible thread. No, he tilted his head slightly, watching me in that way that made my skin burn. "Do you want a drink?" I hesitated. Not because I didn't want to, because I did. And that terrified me. But I nodded anyway. He reached for a bottle on the counter, poured 2 glasses, then handed me one. Our fingers brushed. A touch so brief, so innocent, except it wasn't. Because the moment it happened, the room shrank, the air turned electric, and I felt it. He did too. Neither of us moved. Neither of us pulled away. I should have. Instead, I lifted the glass to my lips, letting the moment linger, letting the silence stretch between us like a thread pulled too tight. I took a slow sip, the liquid burning its way down my throat, but it was nothing compared to the fire spreading through me, the one I had spent weeks trying to ignore. I set my glass down, my fingers trembling slightly. I should go to bed. He didn't say anything, just nodded. But as I turned to leave, his voice stopped me. Soft, low, "Good night." And for some reason, that single word felt like more than it should. It felt like a promise. Or a warning. Later that night, my phone buzzed. I knew who it was before I even looked. I shouldn't have checked. I did anyway. Can't sleep. Thinking about today, I stared at the message, my heart pounding in my throat. I shouldn't answer. But my fingers were already moving. Me too. I stared at the words on the screen, my thumb hovering over the send button. I could still delete it. Still pretend this never happened. But I didn't. I pressed send. And I knew then, this wasn't nothing. This was something. Something I had no control over anymore. It only got worse after that. Every look, every touch, Every unspoken moment between us, it was like standing on the edge of a cliff, staring down at the fall, knowing you should step back, but wanting to jump anyway. And then, the movie night. A simple family evening. Innocent. Except nothing felt innocent anymore. I sat on the couch, my husband on one end, distracted, half asleep, barely paying attention. And then he sat beside me. Too close. His leg brushed mine. A touch so slight, so subtle, that no one else would have noticed. But I did. Because the moment it happened, my breath hitched, my entire body going still. I told myself not to move. Not to react. But then, he inhaled. Barely. Almost unnoticeable. But I felt it. And in that moment, I knew. He was feeling everything I was feeling. The tension. The heat. The pull. And that was when I realized there was no stopping this. Not anymore. Because I didn't want to stop it. I wanted to fall. I should have known it was coming. I should have felt it in the way my pulse quickened every time he walked into a room. In the way silence stretched between us, thick and weighted, full of words neither of us dared to speak. But the truth is, when you're standing at the edge, you never really believe you're going to jump. Not until your feet leave the ground. I woke up at 2 a.m. The house was still. Silent. Except for my heart, pounding in my ears, my breath shallow, uneven. I stared at the ceiling, my body burning with something I didn't want to name. Something I had been fighting for weeks. Sleep wouldn't come. I turned onto my side, my hands gripping the sheets, my mind tangled in memories of fleeting touches, stolen glances, the way his leg had pressed against mine on the couch and neither of us had moved. I closed my eyes, willing myself to forget. And then, the sound. A soft creak in the hallway. My body went still. My breath hitched. I turned my head toward the door, my pulse hammering against my ribs. A shadow. Barely there. Just a shift of darkness against the dim light spilling in from the street. And then, the door. Opening. Just slightly. Just enough for him to be standing there, hesitating, caught in the space between choices. My breath caught in my throat. We locked eyes. Neither of us spoke. Because what was there to say? The moment stretched, endless, unbearable. He was waiting. And I should have stopped this. I should have turned away, closed my eyes, pretended I didn't see him. But I didn't. I sat up, my body moving before my mind could catch up, my hands trembling as I gripped the blanket over my lap. His fingers curled around the edge of the door. A silent question. And I didn't answer. Not with words. But with a breath. A single, sharp inhale that was neither permission nor rejection, just surrender. And that was all it took. A step inside. The soft click of the door shutting behind him. The air changed. Shifted. Like the world outside had ceased to exist, and all that was left was this room, this moment, this choice we were about to make. My skin prickled with anticipation, with something dangerous and undeniable. He took another step forward, slow, hesitant, like he was giving me one last chance to stop him. To stop us. But I didn't move. I couldn't. And then, he was close. Too close. I could feel his breath against my cheek, warm, uneven. His hand lifted, fingers trembling slightly, hovering near my face, so close I could feel the heat of him, but not touching. Not yet. I swallowed hard. My voice barely above a whisper. We can't. A pause. A sharp inhale. And then, his hand. Finally touching my skin. A soft, deliberate brush of his fingertips against my jaw, trailing slowly down my neck, pausing just at my collarbone. Every nerve in my body came alive. I was burning. Falling. His lips parted, a breathless whisper. Tell me to stop. And I should have. I should have told him to leave. I should have turned away. But I didn't. Because in that moment, nothing else existed. Not my husband. Not the consequences. Not the guilt that would come crashing down later, drowning me. There was only this. The touch I had been starving for. The warmth I had been craving for so long, I had forgotten what it felt like to be wanted. And so, I closed my eyes and let it happen. Morning came too soon. The light spilled through the curtains, soft but unforgiving, exposing everything I wanted to pretend hadn't happened. I woke up alone. But the room still carried the scent of him. Of us. The sheets felt different beneath me, rumpled, warm, still whispering the memory of his body against mine. For a moment I lay there, staring at the ceiling, my heart heavy, my thoughts tangled. What have I done? The question circled in my mind, over and over, clawing at me, refusing to be silenced. I squeezed my eyes shut, as if I could erase the night. As if I could rewrite the moment I should have stopped him. Stopped myself. But I couldn't, because it wasn't just a mistake. It was a choice. A deliberate, selfish, reckless choice. And no matter how much I wanted to take it back, I didn't regret it. Not yet. That was the worst part. That, even with the shame pressing down on me, even with the weight of betrayal sinking into my bones, I wanted more. I forced myself out of bed, my body aching. Not just from exhaustion, but from something deeper, something more dangerous. I wrapped a robe around myself, my fingers trembling as I tied the knot at my waist. The house was quiet. Too quiet. And then, voices. Distant, low, coming from the kitchen. I hesitated in the hallway, my stomach twisting, my breath caught in my throat. I knew I had to go in there. Had to act normal. Had to pretend that nothing had changed. Even though everything had. I stepped forward. And the moment I crossed the threshold, I felt it. The shift. The tension. The air was thick, charged, like a storm waiting to break. My husband sat at the table, flipping through his phone, detached as always. Oblivious. I should have felt relief. But all I could feel was guilt. Because if he had looked at me, if he had really seen me, he would have known. And then, him. My nephew. He was there, sitting across from my husband, coffee cup in hand, expression unreadable. He didn't look at me. Not right away. But I could feel him. The awareness of him pressed against my skin, wrapping around me like a second layer of clothing. I forced myself to move, to walk to the counter, to pour myself a cup of coffee with hands that felt like they didn't belong to me. And then, I made the mistake. I looked at him. Just for a second. But it was enough. His eyes met mine, dark, searching, holding something I couldn't name. Was it guilt? Regret? Or something else? Something closer to possession? He wasn't nervous. If anything, he looked sure. Like a man who had crossed a line and had no intention of stepping back. And that terrified me. Because I didn't know if I wanted him to. Breakfast passed in silence. The clinking of spoons against ceramic. The occasional rustle of newspaper. Normal. Except nothing felt normal. Every sound was too loud. Every movement too sharp. I barely ate. I could feel his eyes on me when my husband wasn't looking. I could feel my own body betraying me. Still craving him, still remembering the way his hands had traced my skin in the dark. I felt sick. Sick with shame. Sick with need. When my husband finally stood, kissed my cheek out of habit, and left for work, I thought I would be able to breathe again. But I wasn't alone. Not really. Because the moment the front door shut, I felt him behind me. Close. Too close. I turned, my breath shallow, my pulse hammering in my throat. And there he was, looking at me like the night hadn't ended. Like this was just the beginning. And God help me, I wanted it to be. I couldn't look at myself. Not right away. I went straight to my room after he left the kitchen, shutting the door behind me, pressing my back against it, eyes squeezed shut, heart racing. I told myself I just needed a moment. Just a few minutes to clear my head, to breathe, to regain control over whatever this was before it spiraled any further. But control was an illusion. It had been gone the second I let him step into my room last night. And now, the weight of it was pressing down on me, suffocating. I forced myself to move, to step into the bathroom, to face the person I had become. But the woman staring back at me in the mirror? I didn't recognize her. Her lips were slightly swollen. Her skin carried the faintest trace of fingerprints, reminders of hands that had wandered where they never should have. Her eyes, God, her eyes, they weren't filled with regret. Not entirely. They were searching, questioning, as if they were waiting for her to decide what kind of woman she truly was. A wife? Or something else entirely? I gripped the sink, my breath shallow, my thoughts spiraling. It was just a mistake. I could convince myself of that. I could pretend it was a moment of weakness, that it meant nothing, that I would never let it happen again. But that was a lie. Because deep down, I knew the truth. It wasn't a mistake. A mistake was something you didn't see coming. Something that just happened. But I had felt this coming for weeks. I had watched the tension build, had let myself lean into it, had chosen over and over again to ignore the warning signs. I had wanted it. And that realization sent a cold, sharp wave of shame through me. I squeezed my eyes shut, willing the guilt away, willing him away. But it was too late for that, wasn't it? Because I could still feel him. Still feel the heat of his hands, the press of his lips against my skin, the way his body fit against mine as if it had always belonged there. I bit down on my lip, hard enough to sting. Stop thinking about it. But how could I, when every part of me was still aching from him? Paranoia started to creep in. What if someone knew? What if they had seen something? A glance that lasted too long, a touch that lingered? I replayed the morning in my mind, analyzing every movement, every glance, every pause. Had I acted normal? Had I been careful enough? And what about him? Had he given anything away? I had seen the way he looked at me, the ease with which he had carried himself, the lack of guilt in his eyes. Was he reckless? Or just sure that I wouldn't stop him? Wouldn't stop us? The thought sent another wave of fear through me. I needed to pull away. I needed to stop this before it spiraled further. Before it became something I couldn't bury. I reached for my phone. My fingers hovered over his name. I could tell him it was a mistake. I could tell him it couldn't happen again. I could take control of this before it unraveled completely. I had to. But before I could even type a message, my screen lit up. Him. A text. We need to talk. My stomach dropped. I stared at the words, my hands suddenly cold, my mind screaming at me to ignore it, to delete it, to pretend none of this had ever happened. But I didn't. Because no matter how much I told myself I wanted to fix this, to undo it, I already knew the truth. I didn't want to. I didn't want to walk away. I wanted to see him again. And that terrified me more than anything. Have you ever wanted something you knew you couldn't have? Not just wanted, but ached for? Felt it deep in your bones, in the pit of your stomach, in the spaces between your ribs? Like a hunger you can't satisfy, no matter how much you try to ignore it? I used to think I was stronger than that. I used to believe that temptation was something you could choose to resist, that morality was a solid thing, a firm line that separated right from wrong. But now I know the truth. That line? It isn't solid. It's blurred. It shifts beneath your feet, moving so slowly that you don't even realize you've crossed it until you're standing on the other side, looking back at the person you used to be. And by then, it's too late. I thought I could control it. I thought I could stop it before it went too far. But the moment I let him in, let us happen, there was no turning back. And now? Now I live with it. With the memory. With the guilt. With the knowledge that even if I never touch him again, even if I never see him again, I will always remember. Because once you taste something forbidden, something intoxicating, something that fills the emptiness inside you in a way nothing else ever has, you can't just forget. You carry it with you. Like a scar. Like a secret. Like a hunger that will never fully fade. I wonder, am I alone in this? Or do you understand? Have you ever faced a moment of weakness that changed everything? Have you ever crossed a line you swore you never would, only to realize you don't want to go back? Let's be real, a life is messy. I want to hear your thoughts. Would you have stopped yourself? Would you have walked away? Or would you have done exactly what I did? Tell me in the comments. Let's talk about the things no one else wants to admit. And if this story spoke to you, if you want more real-life confessions, stories of passion, betrayal, and the choices that break us, subscribe to Infidelity Story Saga. Because trust me, the stories only get wilder. They say every choice comes with a consequence. I thought I could forget. But every time I close my eyes, I remember. The way he looked at me. The way I let it happen. The way I wanted it to happen. Loneliness is dangerous. It makes you crave things you swore you never would. It makes you weak. And if you think you're too strong to fall, think again.